there, Mr. Automation is back, and today with some automation on Azure, infrastructure as code on Azure, how to manage resources with Bicep files. Let's go to the demo for that, or the presentation I meant. So infrastructure as code on Azure, managing resources with Bicep. So what is Bicep? I'm going to explain that a little bit. What's ARM? I'm going to explain that as well. We're going to install Bicep if needed. I'm going to show you how that's done. We're going to do a lot of demoing, creating something from a storage account from scratch, for instance, and then we're going to modify that. We rerun it so we can see the item potency as well in the picture, so to speak. So there's a lot of demoing. But first, why Bicep? You already have like the JSON approach to create resources inside of Azure, and perhaps it helps a little bit if I explain that in some more detail. So imagine your this is an Azure resource, for instance, this SQL server, right? This is a virtual machine. This is a data factory. I just gave a couple of examples of resources inside of Azure. The Azure Resource Manager, very applicable name, is able to facilitate all resource automation and creation and validation and such. And that's done by providing the ARM with the JSON file, a JavaScript object notation file. And perhaps I have an example here. Let me see if I have that. I thought I had it. Yeah, here for instance. So this is an example, and this is an example of a storage account, for a storage account in a JSON format. And this format is understood by the Azure Resource Manager, this guy there, that accepts that JSON file here, and that is able to deploy the specific resource inside of Azure. Okay, where does Bicep come into this picture, right? So I created a little drawing here, and so imagine you're sitting here with your Visual Studio and you're creating JSON files here, right? So just add a JSON file there. You can basically push that JSON files to the ARM and it will deploy the resource as specified in your JSON file. For instance, this one is a storage account, right? I can deploy that. But the syntax of JSON is, it's not bad, don't get me wrong here, but it's a little bit cumbersome if you want to do some programming around it, perhaps some looping, you know, for each, but it's not that rich. You can certainly provide external parameters with parameter files, but there are some options to make it a little bit more dynamic. But honestly, this is where Bicep comes into the picture. It's idempotent. Just like this one, by the way, because Bicep basically lays on top on JSON. Basically what happens, we create some Bicep code in a second, and we run a command in Azure to deploy that template, that Bicep template. That's understood by Azure, but what happens under the hood, Bicep translates it to a JSON file, and then ARM does its stuff. Basically, we are extracting away the complexity of JSON. There's a little bit overhead there. You will see that in a second why a Bicep is a lot more powerful, and it's declarative as well, idempotent. So let me go back to the presentation here. So it's a little bit more powerful than JSON. Microsoft promotes Bicep on all their resource automation, by the way, not JSON but Bicep, so the wrapper around it, so to speak. It's early available. Basically everything that comes available inside of Azure Resource Manager ARM is instantly available as well inside of Bicep and the JSON approach. If you click around in the Azure portal, sometimes it can take a couple of months before that functionality is there available. It's already available from an API perspective, but not yet inside of the Azure portal. It's easier to maintain and read the Bicep file. You will see in a second why that is. The looping capability, syntax, there's a lot of programming intelligence inside of it. Basically, it's a sort of a programming language. It has very rich statements. What is ARM? I have a link here, by the way, to Microsoft documentation about ARM, and I'm quite sure that the documentation will give a better explanation than I'm able to do. So, but this is in a nutshell what happens. Azure Resource Manager, like I also showed you in my picture, is deploying all these resources here that you see here down. It has an authentication layer there. So and then you can talk. The Azure portal talks directly to the Azure Resource Manager. PowerShell uses an SDK, and this one as well. So that's the ARM inside of this picture. So let's do some demoing, right? Enough talking, I guess. So let's close this. Let's go to here and create a new file. And we call it part2.bicep. Okay. I also need to explain to you that you need to install Bicep. I'm quite sure that you will be able to reach out to the internet and install Bicep. And if you, for instance, run an AZ command and that deploys a Bicep template, that will automatically install or enable the Bicep executable, so to speak. Otherwise, you need to install it, and when you have it installed, you have Bicep available. You see, you can then run a Bicep minus help, for instance. That means that you have that available. Without that, you cannot start. It's a little bit, I don't need to explain how to search on the internet, right, to install Bicep. Just install it, but you need it to proceed for this demo. Then you create the Bicep file like I did there, and I'll start very simple. So just create a resource. I do tab completion. Yeah, I love the IntelliSense, by the way. It's really rich. So I give it some name. I call it my storage account, my storage ACC. I press a space there again. It's all IntelliSense. So I do storage. I'm interested in a storage account. So I do storage account. Then you specify the API version. You can specify several. I just take the latest one, the newest. And then you do an equal sign. You can also do an existing if you already have an account, but I don't have that. And then you can you can just open and close and start typing here, you know, and then you see what you need. But what you can do as well, I think you can do it here as well. I'll show you the better way. So I'll close this, I'll remove this, and when you open this, required properties, and I just do a tab here, tab, bam. Then I have everything required to create a storage account. So basically we have a requirement that is a name for a storage account. Makes sense, I guess. So let's give this a name, 2411. Location. You can of course specify West Europe, North Europe or anything, but you can also do some dynamics here. So for instance, what you also have is resourceGroup dot, I said dot, location. And that basically means the resource group you have inside of Azure. I have here a resource group that is bound to a location. You see here, North Europe. My resource group is running there. And what I do here is basically inject some dynamics, right? The resource group dot location. And we will see that in a couple of more examples. What you can do here, you have a SKU and a name. I don't know what kind of name. There's a trick there. So if you do control space, you see all the available values, right? You don't need to guess. So I'll take a local LRS, means local storage, not redundant, and the kind, I don't know what kind, control space. So let's take storage v2. I don't need the blob storage. I take a storage v2 account, and basically this is it already. And we're going to advance this a little bit with some parameters and variables even, but this is a basic example on how to create a storage account. Let's create this account. So here I have a little script here, or perhaps I don't need to explain it. Basically the script connects to Azure and let me run some Azure commands, right? I need that to be able to do some automation against Azure, of course. So basically what we do here is first signing in. I'll show you where it comes from. This connect AZ account, that is what you see here. You don't see that, by the way, but it's popping up. The signing window for Azure. I cannot share that, so forgive me for that. But basically we're logging in now in the back on Azure. And we're running this code, and it will take some time. You see it's connecting now. It's trying to get some subscriptions. I have some issues with subscriptions, by the way, but that's besides the point. Then we get the resource group, and then basically now we are connected to Azure. So I stop the debugging here, and what you can do is a new AZ resource group deployment, and then you feed it a Bicep file. Which file? We just created here, right? This part and .bicep. And we're not going to run it yet. I'll show you my resource group here, and I'll refresh it. And as you can see, I have nothing inside of my resource group, right? Demo RG, I have nothing there currently storage account wise. So now let's run this this file and let's see what happens. If we get an error, could be, I don't know. So I press F8 on this line 24, and now we're executing that template file that we just created. And let's wait a little bit for that. I think you can also see that here in deployments. You see that part deploying. You see that for seconds there. That's our new AC resource group deployment command that's running, and you will see it here as well. It's deploying something at least. So we wait a little bit, and we got some output put back here. So yeah, it succeeded. It's pretty cool. So we will see the same thing here. I think if we refresh, it's most probably, you see, it succeeded. And if you now go back to my resource group, we should have, sometimes you need to refresh once more. Let's see. Then we have a storage account, right? This storage account. We just created that from scratch. And imagine we want to change something on the storage account, right? Add a property or something like that, or a value. Perhaps we want to add some tags here. Yeah, that's a nice example. We're going to add some tags there. Let's go back to the bicep file and let's do it under location here. I think tags, yeah, we can do that. And I think it's a sort of an array. I think you can then do tag 1 or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. Value 1 needs to be a string, I think, like this. I don't know if it works. We're just going to try it, right? And let's run this. My demos don't need to be perfect, you know. I don't mind making mistakes and recording them as well and showing them to you as well. No, I don't like those made-up videos, pre-baked and pretty fake as well. Copy and pasting code from the internet most of the time. So I'm really legit, so to speak, right? No, I'm just kidding. But as you can see here, we now have a tag 1, value 1, right? So let's go back to this bicep file again, this one. And let's add another tag, but add some more dynamics, okay? So we call it tag 2. And let's create a parameter here, right? So you can do a param, and then you give it some name, and then you specify what it is. And for now we use a string, and we can assign that a default value, value 2, right? We already have that there as well. Hang on, close that up. Yes, like this. Yeah, force of habit. I think we need to use single quotes here for a string value. Let's see. Yeah, works a little bit better, and perhaps we call this tag 2, right? It's a little bit more, makes a little bit more sense. And what you can do then is here, for instance, on tag 2, we can relate to that value we have inside of this parameter, right? And I'll show you when we run this that we should get a second. We now have one tag here, right? You see that? One tag inside of Azure. Let's size it a little bit up. One tag, value 1, right? On our storage account. We go back to this bicep file. We just added a parameter there, right? Some input with the value 2. And here we specified it by the name we gave it here, right? So we use that value. And I saved it. And I'm going back to this. I will close this old one, by the way. And I will run this template again. Let's see if we get another tag, right, with the value. It's already completed. I wanted to pause the video, but apparently that was not needed. It was quite quick. So let's refresh this. And there we have it. Value 2. Now, let's override the value of tag 2 for now. Let's see the idempotency here, right? In work, idempotency, I meant. So we go to this file and let's change the value to value 2 new, right? We have a new value now. Okay. And we're going to push that back again with this group deployment template commandlet. and we wait a little bit. And again, we deployed something, and let's refresh this in the portal in Azure, and you will see this new value 2 also being reflected. Okay, let's take it to another level, a little bit more advanced. So imagine now we have this parameter. I'm hard coding this value all the time here. You know, it's hard coding, doesn't make much sense. You can actually remove that as a whole, right? And then provide it at runtime. But you can also leave a sort of default value, right? So we call it value default for now. Default, yes. And what you can do if we run this AZ group deployment, this commandlet looks inside of your bicep file, right? It's really dynamic, and it knows that we have a parameter tag2. It knows it. So what we can do then is during runtime we can do a minus tag2 from command line. Okay. So that's the tag we provide now to this. And let's see if it overrides this default value, okay? So let's run this. And wait for it to complete. So now we go back to Azure and we refresh our portal. And we will see that now from command line was added as a... So there you can see the power, right, on the parameters. If I now remove this tag2 again and I run this deployment again, it's using this value 2 default value, right? We just specified there. And imagine the power, you can specify more parameters here, of course, right? Tag2, tag3, location, name, school, kind, you know, everything you want inside of there, you can specify that as a parameter. You can also specify a var if you do it a little bit more hard-coded, but you can create a dynamic var as well, right? Do some querying there, perhaps, on the to retrieve a value. Let's go back to our storage account, and as we can see, we now have value 2 default back again. I think this is it for the simple example. Let me see. So we created a storage account from a bicep file. We modified the bicep file by changing the value. We did that. We added a parameter or a var. Let's use the var as well. We're going to add the variable as well. I did not show that yet, so let's do that now. Create the var scoop equals, very simple. I just take this name there, just copy it. It's a little bit lame, but you just need to know how it works. So then you can provide that value there, right? Without the quotes around it, because it's now a value there stored, right? And it holds this value, and that's then added there. Or for instance, we could even do a var kind, right? And we specify storage v2 there. Yeah, you get the picture, I guess. Okay, so you can use parameters at runtime to provide values, so you can wrap a script around it, you know, and provide some dynamics. That's the best approach, of course, working with parameters, not anything hard-coded. Here, for instance, I have the storage name hard-coded. It's just horrible, of course. But for this example, we could create a param, and actually we're going to do that. Param name string equals, and we give it a default value again. Sorry for my typing. MRB2411 again, and now we can specify the name there. Name, right? So this param name. Move it up a little bit. We can use that now there, and at runtime we can override this value. So let's do that as well. So we go back to this part 2, and what we can do now is minus name, right? We gave it a name. So what we can do here, minus name, MRB2412, right? It's different name. So basically what we're doing here is creating a whole new storage account again. So let's try that. So let's run this, see if we get an error. I hope not. And like I told you, I'm not gonna cheat. It failed. It still used the old value. So I think perhaps name, I'll use st name for storage name. And perhaps the name, you know, it makes sense that it's perhaps reserved for a special meaning. Oh, no, I made a mistake there, right? I did not. Oh, no. I did it correctly. So let's run this again. So we go back to here, run it again. Let's see if we now get, and it is now st name, of course. We changed that. And let's run it again and see if we get a new storage account. So there, that completed. And now we go back to our demo resource group, refresh it. Let's see, we have nothing yet. Let's refresh it again, perhaps a little bit too quick. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, so let's wait a little bit more yet. Let's refresh it a couple of times. Yeah, there we have it. North Europe, this default value. So let's change this tag to for this system, and then we're done with this simple example. So we'll use that name, but we could also specify I don't know, tag 2, right? So minus tag 2, override value, right? We overwrite that value. I'm going to make it a little bit more readable here by providing a backtick here. It's horrible, but it's quite needed now. And let's run this commandlet again. Let's wait a little bit. There we have our result back, and there we have, if we refresh this first, a refresh. Then we see now the overridden value. So that was adding a parameter or a variable. Perhaps we can also create a wrapper script that creates like 10 accounts. Perhaps that's a nice one to add here. So for instance, we could do something like for I equals 0, $I less than 10, right? We keep it less than 10, and then we increment I said increment. So, and let's see what's inside of I. Just always like to troubleshoot a little bit. So if you loop this, let's see what we get. Okay, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's fine. So we can use this. So what we basically can do is then move this part inside of there, right? And for instance, we just append the I there, right? So what happens here is MRB 2412, and then it appends 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we also use the overridden value there, and we specify some dynamics there, okay? So then this I value comes inside of that storage account tag 2, right? Overridden value I, so it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's run this, and let's see if we get like a bunch of storage accounts, right? I run this and I pause it as well a little bit, otherwise it takes too much time. So perhaps it's still nice to go back to this crappy paint drawing I created. Excuse me for that, but I think the picture should be sort of clear, right? I'm sitting here on this, let's take another color this time. I'm sitting here on this Visual Studio box. I'm creating this bicep file, right? You saw that in my editor. We added some dynamics there with the params. You can externally manage that, right? You can feed that at runtime. And you also had vars, those live inside of the bicep file. It could be that you have like a default variable that applies to every object you create. You can stick that inside of a var. There's no need to create a param for that. This bicep file then gets transpiled to JSON. That's invisible for us. That's done by this, by running this commandlet, this new AZ resource deployment, right? This guy transpiles this bicep file we have open here, this bicep file. It translates it to a JSON file, right? And a JSON file, I showed you an example already. This is a JSON file example for a storage account. You see the syntax is very different. So that's what happens. So this is transpiled to a JSON file. Then the JSON file is handed over to ARM by that command that we're running. And then ARM does some checking and validation on it. If you used valid values, for instance, storage account have a sort of restriction. If you make it too long storage account or too short, it won't be accepted. Then we get a failure. So that means that actually it will never deploy. So for instance, we have here a storage account, right? If the validation here fails on the ARM, it will never even try to deploy that account. So you never get like a half deployed count or something like that. So it does some validation there. If it fails, it will communicate that back, of course, to my Visual Studio there, right? That it failed. And let's go back here. I think it's still running. It created some accounts already, so perhaps, you know, there's no multi-threading, so perhaps we can check the portal already and see if we have some new storage account already. Yes, as you can see here, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, and the 4 was now being created. So that piece of code is still running in the back. And I showed you as well, if you go to your deployments inside of your resource group, you can see those deployments running here. And we need to wait for those 10 accounts, so I'll pause the video a little bit more. Currently it's creating account MRB, this one, 126, so we need to wait. I think it went to 29, so we need to wait for 3 more accounts to be created. Account 28 being created. I did created some videos in the past about multi-threading, and you can apply that technique here as well, you know, creating those storage account with some multi-threading. Just check out my channel for that. I have a couple of videos on multi-threading. And what multi-threading does is basically deploy them all at the same time, right? Not doing storage account 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. It deploys them all at the same time. So that's the big difference there. So imagine you have here 10 storage account, and now we're looping through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, and then every time we set up a connection, we create that account, get it back, and we create the following account. But you can actually implement multi-threading and just send those 10 accounts at once to this ARM with some multi-threading, right? So at once, and then all those accounts get created simultaneously, and then you get, at some point, you get the result back that you have your 10 accounts available. It will be a lot faster, of course, but for this demo, I did not bother to implement any multi-threading. Let's see. Okay, it also finished with the last account, so let's go back to our demo group here. And go to our demo group, and let's see, we should have a bunch of storage accounts, and we have them here. As you can see, they are all there, and I don't need them, of course. I'm going to delete them in a second. Let's go back, export the whole resource group to JSON and recompile to bicep file. Yeah, that could be very interesting. Let me focus on that a little bit. Yeah, and there's an export AZ resource group command that accepts a resource group name as input, and I have that as a variable already available here. So when I do that, it exports everything inside of the resource group to a JSON file, right? A JSON file. So I'll show that. Hang on. Let's wait for that. So now it's exporting this resource group, this demo RG. So basically all the storage accounts. And let's see. Yeah, we got something back. Demo RG JSON. So if we now go to this JSON file, this is an export of everything we created with the bicep file, right? All the storage account, all these services, and such and such and such. And how do you convert that to a bicep file, right? You want to know how that is done, and I will show you that. So with bicep installed, you can do a decompile I said, of this demo RG.json, right? So we're decompiling the JSON to a bicep file. At least we try. All right, let's see what we get back. There are also some warnings and on best effort and such, and there are some read-only properties. That's all correct, so we need to remove them from the file. That's beside the point, besides the scope of this demo, I meant. What you can see clearly here is that now you have, you know, parameters for the storage account, name string. See, we have all these JSON objects now in a bicep format. So if you ever are curious how to JSON file, you need to convert that to a bicep file. You can do that with bicep space decompile, and then you specify the JSON file you exported, right, with from Azure. And then you get a bicep file, which basically you can then use for deployment, right? You have a bicep file. You need to modify some stuff here and there, of course. It's not perfect, like this value, it's not even allowed to set that, I think, outside of this, so you can actually remove that as a whole. That's beside the scope. I just wanted to show you how to decompile a JSON file. And you can also do it graphically, not fully, but you can certainly do some stuff there. What you can do is go to your, you see that export templates, you are in your resource group, and on the left side you can go to export template. And what you get here is generating a template. And now what you see here, you see all this stuff there, is the same as you saw here, right? We already extracted that, you see? Schema, current version 1, current version 1, blah, blah, blah. See, everything that you see here is here as well. It's the same. So you can also copy Control A, Control C, and create a JSON file, and then decompile it, of course, and then you do it from a graphical approach instead of a command line approach. So that's the decompiling part. Let me think if we can create perhaps some more objects in Azure. I will first delete all my storage account that we created, because it will cost money at some point, of course, and I don't need them. So I will remove I just selected all the stuff here and I press on delete, and it's not deleting your resource group, don't worry. It's only deleting the selected items there. So let's do that now. And as you can see, the cleanup process for storage account is quite fast, to be fair, because I pressed pause for the video, but it was completed in like 2 or 3 seconds. I did not expect it to be that fast, to be fair, but it's good. Just for the sake of the demo, let's create another bicep file. We could create a new file from scratch, and we try to create another resource in Azure. So no, I don't want to create it there. I want to create it here. Let's call it DataFactory. I want to create a DataFactory. Okay, I call it .bicep. DataFactory. Again, here you can do resource, right? mydf, I call it now like that, mydf, space. And there's an extremely long list here, but you can type for factory, for instance, see, data factory. I press tab to confirm this type of object, of resource actually. Then you specify the API version. I take the latest, and I press space, and then you do an equal sign, means you want to assign something, and you press space again, and then required properties. As you can see, there for the data factory is only a name required. You just call it my data factory. I just want to show you the process again. So very simple. And with JSON you need to specify a lot more than this, I can tell you that. And let's try to deploy this data factory. Okay, we only provided this, and I don't know if it works. I'm really just testing on the fly. So let's move this out of there. We don't need that there anymore. And we don't need that. And now we had the data factory.bicep file, right? Now we have that one. Let's try to deploy it and see what we get. And apparently it did something at least, so let's inspect that a little bit. It took some time, not that long. Oh, it failed, by the way. So let's see why it failed. Deployment failed with errors. Status message, the location property is required for this definition. Okay, so location required. So that's interesting, because we created this data part and we did the required properties, right, from the bicep. So there's a bug there. Doesn't matter. So apparently the location is also required. So we can do the use resource group dot location trick again, right? You can also, of course, create a var location here equals, and then I'm a little bit lazy, I'm going to copy that over. You can provide that there, and then here you can just provide the word location, of course, right? Perhaps you need the location on several other spots. Just want to show you a little bit how it works. And you can also create a param, of course, right? A param of type string, not sting, but string. That does the same, but we keep it for a var now. Var location. Var location is that, and you reuse that there. And I'll save this, and I'll run the deployment again for the data factory, and I'll clear the screen here. down, and let's see if we get an error again. Let's see what we get back. Okay, this time we got the succeeded back, incremental, so that's good. So let's go to our resource group here, refresh it, and let's see, refresh it again. If we have a data factory here already, yes, I have a data factory. You see, data factory v2. Let's open this data factory, and we do sort of the same tricks. Perhaps I don't know if it even possible, by the way, to set tags. Oh, you can set tags here, right? We don't have any tags on the data factory. Let's set some tags. Let's see if it's possible. So we go back to this data factory file. Tags, I already showed you that. You open and close that. And we do tag 1, value 1. And it needs to be string, by the way. Value 1. And I'm lazy. Right, and tag 2 as well. So now we add some tags to our data factory. I save that file. We go back to our script and deploy this template again, this data factory.bicep template. And it should be quite quick, I think, only setting some tags. I already explained, right, the process here. ARM is checking the data factory already exists, so it only knows it needs to modify the tags, right? All the other stuff is already okay, so it won't touch that. It's idempotent, right? And it succeeded. So let's go back to the data factory. Let's refresh that here. Let's refresh. And let's go to tags. Let's see. Yeah, you see my data factory tag 1, value 2. Okay. Let's go back to this bicep file once more. And I already showed you on this one, you know, you can, for instance, override the tag, right? We have a tag 2 here. And this is hard-coded now. If you want to make it dynamic, you can do it like that. And then specify the tag there, right? Tag 2. And just for now, we give it a default value. Already showed you that we can override it, right? So if we now run this same command again, and we do minus tag 2 and my value, okay? And we run this again. Now only tag 2 will be changed, and basically on external output, input, I meant. This file is now accepting an external parameter to provide a different value than value to default, you know, and use that value there on the tags. So let's go back and let's refresh this, and there we have tag to my value. So yeah, honestly, it's very powerful bicep, right? I'm trying to show some more examples, perhaps. Yeah, I just was looking through some documentation, and perhaps it's interesting to share that. On Microsoft docs.microsoft.com, you have a lot of information about all these bicep templates and how to use them and how to create objects. So, for instance, if you are interested in Kubernetes, perhaps you can manage cluster. And then basically you get a JSON file right here. You see a JSON file for the whole cluster setup. And if you click on the bicep here, you will see a bicep file on how to create a cluster. And perhaps I'll show that also inside of an editor, right? So let's create a new file. We call it aks.bicep, right? We want to do something with aks. So we want to have a resource and my aks, right? And it has something to do with aks. Let's see if we can actually find something like that, or Kubernetes, connected cluster. Yeah. So, and then we specify the API again. We do an equal sign and we press space and we do the required properties again, right? It's very easy. And then this is all required. So you need to have a name, a location, an identity, and a type. And at least a certificate. So these are the minimum requirements to get the Kubernetes connected cluster up and running. I just wanted to show you that you can do it from an IntelliSense perspective as well, because this file, if you copy all this over, this could be perhaps a little bit intimidating to start with, right? It's, you see, it's a lot, and there's lots of squiggly lines and perhaps stuff you don't understand yet. You can also build such a template up, right? It's idempotent, so every time you add something, you just rerun it and just extend the functionality. instead of starting very big. So I would advise to start very small and just build it up like I did with the storage account. You know, we could add properties and values over time and just advance that bicep file. We don't have time for that in the demo, of course, but in real life you will do such a scenario. This data factory, for instance, over time it becomes more advanced and you will add stuff and perhaps even linked services and you know, you have all kinds of relations inside of ADF, access even, you know, identity, such, so you can add that all from a code perspective, from a bicep file. So let me go back to the sort of presentation here. So we exported everything, we wrapped the script even. So let me go one more time back to the scrappy drawing. I think I explained everything, should be clear now. So yeah, and you know what comes, I guess. The last slide. A big thank you, of course, for watching, and have the patience to stay with me because it's this time it's a long video. It's 40 minutes already, so I really need to quit. Thanks for watching again, and I hope to see you again.